Yeah.
Let's just call year one a trial run. Manny Diaz in Miami failed to live up to the lofty expectations in 2019, but I can promise you that will not be the case in 2020. Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert, the best kept secret in all of college football. Today, bringing you our 2020 Miami Hurricanes college football predictions. As always, make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, and share these videos as we continue to predict every single team within the ACC, along with every single Power 5 team as well. Also, make sure to check out everything down in our description below, where you can get exclusive content on our website, thegridironexpert.com, and also follow us on social media over on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So 2019 was a pretty rough year for the U. Miami went just 6-7 in year one under Manny Diaz and crashed and burned towards the end, losing 3 straight games to Florida International, Duke, and Louisiana Tech by an average of 10 points per game. That's not acceptable at all. By Miami standards, that's absolutely embarrassing. So Manny Diaz knew changes had to take place. He knew that wasn't acceptable, and he knew that year 2 had to be way better than year 1. So he started making tons of changes, and a lot of them came on the offensive side of the ball, where Miami returned 7 starters from last year, but one major change is bringing in a new offensive coordinator, bringing in Rhett Lashlee from SMU, where his Mustangs last year surprised everybody by averaging 41.8 points per game and being in the hunt for a New Year's Six bowl game up until the very end of the season. He's going to come in and change the offense from more of a pro-style offense to more of a spread-style offense, which should benefit D'Eriq King, their new quarterback, the transfer from Houston, who is a deadly dual-threat QB and should pose some problems for opposing defenses as long as the offensive line improves. Miami returns basically their entire offensive line from last year, but it was a line that allowed 51 sacks in 2019, the most out of any Power 5 team. So Miami has to have consistency at the quarterback position, something they did not have last year. They have to have protection for their quarterback, something they really did not have last year. And if so, that's going to really benefit their skill players, such as Cameron Davis back at running back, Brevin Jordan at tight end, and some of the other pass catchers as well for the Hurricanes. It's an offense that only averaged 25.7 points per game last year, and if everything goes the way they expect it to, you might see an even touchdown increase in terms of points per game. You look at their defense, of course, that is Manny Diaz's forte. We know that he was really the leader during Mark Richt's tenure. The main reason that Miami was in college football playoff discussion and in ACC title discussion for all those years was because of their defense, always one of the best in the country. They allowed just 20.2 points per game last year, were 13th in the nation in total defense, despite going 6-7. They now have 5 starters back from last year's squad, including sophomore Gregory Rousseau along the defensive line, who was 2nd in the nation last year with 15.5 sacks. So Rousseau alone is going to be a nightmare for opposing offensive lines. And they also landed a Temple transfer along the defensive line, Quincy Roche, who had 13 sacks at Temple in 2019. So you've got 2 defensive ends that are going to be nightmares for opposing offensive lines and opposing quarterbacks. And this is a Miami defense that once again will rank in the top 15 in the country. But take a look at their schedule here. They open up against Temple. I find this to be a very fitting game. Very interesting game because, as we all know, Manny Diaz had left to go take the Temple job before Mark Richt even resigned. And once he did, he left the Temple job to come take the head coaching position at Miami. And I don't blame him. Miami, way better job than Temple. But just interesting because of that connection, interesting because of the Roche connection, and interesting because Temple's no pushover. They have Anthony Rousseau back at quarterback, 8 returning starters on offense, and they usually have a very strong defense as well. So Temple, not a game that Miami can afford to overlook, a game that will test them. A game that will give the offensive line a test against a solid defense. A game that will allow D'Eriq King to not, have a cupcake game. Will actually make him put forth some effort against a solid American Athletic opponent. But Miami will get the win over the Owls. They will get the win over Wagner. They will get the win over UAB. First couple of games, not too bad for year 2 under Manny Diaz. They've already matched half of last year's win total. They then go on the road to take on Michigan State. This is a very intriguing matchup, guys. This is one that I'm really looking forward to for tons of reasons here. But one of them, of course, is how well does Michigan State's offensive line hold up against Miami's defensive line? Because we know Michigan State doesn't have much going for them, but one thing that they do have is a very strong and large O-line that will complement a strong running game. So how does Miami's defense handle that? But Michigan State brings in Mel Tucker, who was kind of thrust onto the scene after Mark D'Antonio left Michigan State high and dry. They haven't benefited from spring practices at all, and Michigan State really doesn't have much of a QB either. So this is going to be an interesting game to see. Does Michigan State kind of right their ship? Do they start off the season better than expected, or will they struggle? And I think it's the latter. I do think they struggle mightily in 2020. Enough so that I think Miami comes in here, puts on a show defensively. I think D'Eriq King is going to really, really challenge this Michigan State defense, which is really going to be their only strength this year. And they go on the road and get a huge win over a Power 5 opponent, guys. A road win over a Power 5 opponent. And look, don't look now, but Miami's 4-0 and certainly in the top 25. They then kick off ACC conference play, going back home to take on Pittsburgh. Last year on the road, Miami defeated Pittsburgh 16-12. They scored the game-winning touchdown with just 58 seconds left. And the funny thing about last year's game was Pittsburgh ranked first in the country in sacks per game, nearly averaging 4 sacks per game. Miami's offensive line was one of the worst in the country last year, yet they only allowed 2 sacks to that Panthers defense. And that's something that really stood out to me. So yes, Pittsburgh's defense is going to be very talented yet again. They returned 8 starters on that side of the ball. Yes, we know Kenny Pickett should maybe turn a corner finally at quarterback after throwing just 13 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. But the game is in Miami. Miami won it last year with the worst team that they're going to have this year. At home, they take care of business against an improving Panthers squad. And Miami, look at that. They're 5-0. I know you Miami faithful are thrilled. Sitting at 5-0 right now, going into a Friday night game against Wake Forest. Now, this is a Wake Forest team that if you don't know football that much, you look at it and you say they lost Jamie Newman to Georgia. They lost Cade Carney. They lost Kendall Hinton. They lost Scotty Washington. They're going to be terrible offensively. It's not the case. Certainly not the case. Sam Hartman is a very talented QB. Keep in mind, guys, he was the starter for Wake Forest back in 2018 before he went down with an injury. Wake Forest was 7-1 last year before the injury bug hit them, forcing them to go 1-4 down the stretch. And Wake Forest returned Sage Surratt at wide receiver, one of the best in the ACC, and 9 starters on the defensive side of the ball as well. That pass rush for Wake Forest is the real deal. Same can be said for Pittsburgh. One of these games, I think Miami's offensive line will struggle. I think it's not going to come against Pittsburgh. I think it's going to come on the road, off a short week, at Wake Forest, a team that, yes, did lose a lot, but is still going to be pretty dang good under Dave Clawson. And I think the Hurricanes take their first loss of the season to the Demon Deacons. And of course, I know that's not what anybody wants to hear. I know people think it's ridiculous. But again, Wake Forest on the road. This is a Dave Clawson team that usually overperforms, usually exceeds expectations. And I feel it's kind of being that little trap game here. Those Friday night games are very, very tricky and scary for those road teams in the world of college football. But yet again, it's a much better start than Miami had last year. They're 5-1 now going into their bye week, which it comes at a perfect time coming into this North Carolina game. We've said it before, and we'll say it again. The ACC Coastal Division, yes, is relatively wide open. And when you look at it, there's probably 3 major teams that can contend for it. It's North Carolina, it's Miami, and it's Virginia Tech. You might throw Pittsburgh in there as well, but those main 3 that we just mentioned are the ones that everybody's going to have their eyes on. Which means when Miami plays North Carolina and Virginia Tech and vice versa, those games are going to determine who wins the division. Miami's lucky enough to be getting a week of rest and hosting UNC, a team they lost to 28-25 on the road last year. The major question in this one is how well does Miami stop Sam Howell and that UNC aerial attack? Or not how well, can they? Can they stop Sam Howell and this UNC aerial attack that returns 10 starters offensively? The answer is yes. Yes, in fact, they will. The secondary usually is a strength for a Manny Diaz-led team. And I like Miami to really get at least 2 turnovers in this game. 2 turnovers in this game against the Tar Heels. I like they got a bye week. I like that it's at home. I like the little bit of revenge that might be on their mind after falling by 3 points on the road last year. Miami steals a win over Mac Brown and his Tar Heels. They're 6-1 and perhaps in the driver's seat of the ACC Coastal Division. Yes, they have one conference loss, but now North Carolina does too. On Halloween, they traveled to Virginia, a team they defeated 17-9 last year in Miami. That was a big upset because that was a good Virginia team led by Bryce Perkins, a very talented defense, one that made the ACC championship and gave Florida a pretty good fight in the Orange Bowl. We know that for Virginia this year, their key to success is the quarterback position. Does Brennan Armstrong play well? Does Keaton Thompson play well, the transfer from Mississippi State? Who fills in for Bryce Perkins, who was basically the entire Virginia offense these past few years? The one thing I do like about Virginia, though, is their defense that returns 9 starters. Their defensive line is also extremely good this year. This is going to be a very low-scoring game, I feel like, on the road, but yet again, I feel like it's the defense that plays a factor, and I think Virginia pulls off the upset. I think Virginia, similar to Miami here with UNC, has a little bit of revenge on their mind. They want to avenge that 8-point loss that they suffered on the road last year. This game will be very similar to that 17-9 game we saw last year. Don't expect either team to, in my opinion, exceed 24 points. But I think it's Bronco Mendenhall's squad that gets the win, and Miami takes their second loss of the season, second in conference play as well. They return home, though, to kick off November against Florida State, and lucky for you, Miami fans, you're going to make it 4 straight wins over your in-state rivals. Miami will win their 4th straight game over the Seminoles. Here's the thing. Miami beat Florida State 27-10 last year in Tallahassee, and that was ultimately the deciding game to get rid of Willie Taggart at Florida State. Miami last year, guys, had 9 sacks against Florida State. The Seminoles had a terrible offensive line too, so they were in the same boat. But look at it this year. Miami has the game at home. The defensive line is going to be just as strong, if not better. They have, I think, a better quarterback situation than what Florida State's dealing with. They have consistency at the coaching position, unlike Florida State, who's now bringing in Mike Norvell. Will Florida State improve? Absolutely. But they don't have enough to come on the road and get a win over the Hurricanes. It's 4 straight. And, of course, when you can beat Florida State, it's a big year for Miami. It's a big deal to beat your in-state rivals. So they get a win over Florida State here, then travel to Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, and Duke to close out the season. One of those games is not like the other. I think we all know which one that is. It's the road game at Virginia Tech. Another game that could determine who wins the Coastal Division. Last year, Miami lost at home to the Hokies 42-35. They came all the way back. They were down 21 points in the 4th quarter, but allowed Virginia Tech to score a game-winning touchdown with 1:03 left and escape with a 7-point victory. Miami had 5 games last year decided by 1 possession, guys. So, yeah, they went 6-7, but a couple pieces fall the right way, and Miami's looking at a 9 or 10 win season. So there was some inexperience there, some poor coaching decisions along the way that resulted in a few extra losses, and that Virginia Tech game was probably one of them. But the Hokies returned 19 starters this year. They're going to be very, very experienced. And the key here is, can Miami's defense contain Hendon Hooker, the dual-threat quarterback, kind of similar to De'Aaron King, who gave Virginia Tech the life they needed offensively in that Miami game to turn their season around and finish 8-5, going 6-2 down the stretch. The game being in Blacksburg, a very, very difficult place to play, I don't think Miami's going to be able to go on the road and get this one. I think Virginia Tech's defense, even though they don't have Bud Foster, Virginia Tech's defense, which returns 10 starters, steps up, slows down this Miami offense. You take away De'Aaron King, they're going to struggle. And I think that the Hurricanes drop this game here, but win against Georgia Tech. And that really should not come as much of a surprise. Georgia Tech did defeat Miami last year, 28-21 in overtime. I still don't know how that happened. I still don't know how Miami allowed that to happen to a Georgia Tech team that only averaged 16.7 points per game and was still adjusting to Jeff Collins' system. So revenge is certainly on their mind this year. Georgia Tech thinks, hey, we can beat them last year, we can beat them this year. I think Manny Diaz and the Hurricanes say, all right, look, last year, again, was a trial run. We're not going to allow that crap to happen again. We're not going to allow those poor losses like the Florida International Dukes and Louisiana Techs to happen again. And I think Miami comes out and takes off some big frustration, not after what happened last year, but also because of what happened the week before. They annihilate the Yellow Jackets on the road, and then they beat Duke in the season finale. Another type of revenge game there. They lost to the Blue Devils by 10 last year. How they did it, I don't know. Yes, Duke brings in Chase Bryce. Yes, their secondary will be relatively strong, but revenge is a dish best served warm down in the heat, down in Miami. They win this game, and the Hurricanes finish the season at 9-3. And my goodness, what a drastic improvement that would be. 9-3, ladies and gentlemen, after going 6-7 last year, with losses to Florida International, Duke, and a shutout bowl loss to Louisiana Tech. You see a major improvement on offense, led by Rhett Lashlee and De'Aaron King from Miami. They go 9-3. Yes, they lose 3 conference games, which means they might not make the ACC championship, which means they might not win the Coastal. But they get some quality wins over Michigan State, Pittsburgh, North Carolina, Florida State. Have a chance at a 10-win season in year 2 under Manny Diaz. And all of the doubts and all of the concerns after a very disappointing 2019 have all vanished and gone away. The U is not officially back yet, but this is a major step in the right direction and a major step in getting there. So guys, thank you so much for watching us here at The Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, and share these videos. And check out everything we have for you down in the description below. Exclusive content on our website, thegridironexpert.com, and on social media as well, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And once again, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on The Gridiron Expert.